All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
We appreciate you all coming out here this morning. I'm wondering how you heard about this event.
Newspaper this morning.
From the newspaper this morning. Good.
Poster on the door at the library.
Okay, great.
I just saw you outside and got curious.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Appreciate you being here. I'm not exactly sure what your expectations are for the morning, but we've got kind of a unique platform. My name is Brett Wilcox. I'm here with my wife, Chris, and David and Olivia, son and daughter. And on January 18th, David and I started running across the USA, literally running across the USA. We started in Huntington Beach and made our way across California. One of the highlights of California is that every riverbed we crossed, we said, oh, there's another California river. And they were all empty. There was nothing in any of them. It was really quite disturbing to see a state that's got millions of people and evidently no water. And I understand that Flagstaff is in a similarly dry situation. For us, as we run across the country, it's been beautiful. but when you're trying to keep your reservoirs filled or your backyard watered, that's not a good situation. So anyway, we are running for a GMO Free USA. We're officially running into Flagstaff this afternoon, this evening. We're out at Belmont right now, and we'll back up, drive out there in the truck, and officially run in this evening. We're glad to be here in the East Flagstaff Community Library. We're grateful for the library for providing a room for us today so that we could give this presentation about the run and about our mission. I also want to thank the Sitka Conservation Society. We are from Sitka, Alaska, and the Sitka Conservation Society is a nonprofit in Sitka that is dedicated to preserving the health and the well-being of the Tongass National Rainforest. And it may seem kind of an odd thing that the Sitka Conservation Society has teamed up with us, so to speak. But when they heard that we were out on a GMO-free mission, that really resonated with Sitka. Can you all guess why that might be the case?
You're near Canada.
It's because of the GMO salmon, which is coming to a plate near you. It wasn't too long ago that the regulatory agencies in Canada approved the commercial sale of GMO salmon, the eggs, and they're being scheduled to be shipped down to, I think it's Panama or Costa Rica, one of those countries where they will be raised inland, supposedly safe, and so they won't escape into nature, where they will be then sold to the U.S. market, even though the U.S. market has overwhelmingly rejected GMO salmon long before it's made it to the grocery stores. And there's 1,000 or 2,000 different stores that have already said they will not sell GMO salmon if it ever makes it to the commercial stage. So because Sitka Conservation Society is dedicated to preserving the health of the Tongass, and salmon is an integral part of the Tongass National Rainforest, that was a good fit for us. I'd also like to thank my cousin, Helen Sealander, who recently kind of came on board with us to help with the PR work, and that's why we're having this event this morning, because she called ahead and scheduled with the library to have this event. I want to thank Kenny Thompson. If you notice this wild GMO, no GMO t-shirt, it says no GMO and what are we eating? On the back, you look at this design. I specifically requested this design with the honeybee because we know that pollinators are being severely impacted because of GMO monoculture agriculture. We've seen that big time with the neonicotinoids in Europe, seen that here as well. I just read a recent article, just barely came out in the Huffington Post, about the demise of the monarch butterflies, which is now being linked directly to the monoculture agriculture in the Midwest, and how glyphosate is wiping out the milkweed plant. And so monarchs are literally starving to death. They have no food sources anymore, and so some people are actually predicting an extinction there because the population is down so much. We'd like to thank all the contributors and donors. We had an Indiegogo campaign that ended 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we raised a good chunk of change, not nearly enough to get us across the country, but it was a good start. And so there's a lot of people out there that are supporting us. We got a nice donation out of Anchor Point, Anchorage in the middle of the night last night. So those donations are coming in on our webpage, and our webpage is runningthecountry.com. We're also collaborating with GMO Free USA, which is a nonprofit organization. And they do some great work on the internet exposing the problems with GMO agriculture. And so we're using the GMO Free USA seed label. These seeds are donated from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, a company out of Missouri. And our label, our web address is on the back, runningthecountry.com. We're going to be running through Kansas City, which is the headquarters of Monsanto. And before we get to the headquarters of Monsanto, we're going to be stopping in, I think it's Mansfield. Yes, Mansfield, Missouri, which is the headquarters of Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, so we can meet the people who have generously provided these seed packets for us. So these were all given to us for free so that we could distribute to people while we're on the road. Let's see, before I go on any further, I'd like to introduce Carol Thompson, who is here this morning. And I'm glad you're here, and you've got an important message to share, so I'm going to step aside for a minute.
I'll share this with you, and then you can ask me questions. As of last week, Arizona has started a petition to label GM in Arizona, and the petition is an initiative to be on the ballot, and it has to be completed by July. In order to get on the ballot, we need 143,000 signatures. So in northern Arizona, we need 20,000 signatures approximately in the next 3 months. And it's basically saying that Arizonans want our food labeled. The movement is called Right to Know Arizona. We have a right to know what we are eating. And the FDA regulates food labels, and they can add GM to it. The Arizona initiative is building off of the California and Washington one. We have added in our initiative that meat has to be labeled if the animal has mainly been fed on GM grain, which many animals are. That means labeling a shelf or a meat counter rather than the meat itself, but so that you know that. 64 countries reject GM. The rest of the world, I work in Southern Africa, the rest of the world thinks we're crazy, that we don't know what we're eating. The rest of the world knows that we're guinea pigs, but without a control group, because we're all eating GM. So this is an initiative in Arizona. There will be other states doing it, and it's really important. And then, as Brett will probably tell you, Monsanto's fighting back, such as preventing county initiatives, and they want to prevent state initiatives. So, Right to Know Arizona, label our food GM or not.
And in order to sign this petition, you have to be an Arizona resident, is that correct?
Yes, well, not just a resident. You have to be a registered voter,
All
like
right.
all petitions.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, Coconino County too.
No,
For you.
no, this is a statewide initiative. So a registered voter, yeah.
How can people contact you if they're not here today?
Let me give you my email address. It's just my name, carol.thompson@nau.edu. And it is very, very much on campus among the undergraduates and the graduate students. And it's very much within the food movement of northern Arizona. So about anyone you know in the food movement, from the gardeners to the CSA and where even the grocery stores are with us on this one.
And you have plenty of people to be circulating
No,
these petitions?
no. We need 20,000 signatures. So if you want to take some blank ones, and I have my name on the back, yes, we need armies of people to gather signatures. And the state of Arizona makes it very difficult, so I'll talk to you if you want to help circulate. And that is to block citizen participation. I don't know if you know that this last week, the legislator talked about even if you do all this work, do pass the initiative, that there'll be a statute of limitations. So then you have to redo it in 3 to 5 years. So Arizona makes this very difficult. But we're having fun because we think Monsanto will go, hey, what? Arizona? Trying to do this? We're not Oregon and we're not California. So we're having fun with that. And we do think left to right of the political spectrum wants to have the right to know what they're eating. This is not a party issue. It is a right to know issue.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, enough.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Some people say that this is a controversial issue, and the people try to spin it as a controversial issue, but there is nothing controversial about my children's health. And when it comes to what's in our food, we do have a right to know. And I believe it's far more than just a right to know. It's an absolute necessity to know. I mean, this goes beyond the right. And the people that fight against Carol will say that genetically modified foods are substantially equivalent to conventional foods. Although we have more and more research, it comes out all the time that shows that there are substantial differences between GMOs and conventional foods. We see that all the time. New research, they say it's the same. And I lost my train of thought here for a second, but it'll come back to me. It's not just about the food. It's not just the state of the food or the quality of the food. When you purchase food that has come through the Monsanto pipeline, some of that money goes back to Monsanto, and that money is then used to keep you from knowing what's in your food. So they use that money against you. When the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which is a big lobbying association for the biotech industry and for the junk food industry, they are actively fighting to keep us from knowing what's in our food. I've got a few websites here that I just want to look up real fast and show you quickly. So I just want to talk about some of the things that are happening right now. Saturday, February 22nd at 11 a.m. in Southern California, there's a rally being held called the Operation Shopping Cart. It's called Expose the GMA. So these people down there are meeting to talk about the GMA, the Grocery Manufacturers Association. Do you remember what the Grocery Manufacturers Association did with I-522 in Washington State back last fall, where they funneled money illegally through the GMA? They gathered money from the junk food companies, and then they used that money to spread lies in Washington so that voters would vote against labeling. Well, they got fined for that. But this is what they're doing. The GMA, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, plans to sue any communities or states passing GMO labeling laws or declaring GMO-free zones. The GMA has petitioned the FDA to label GMOs as natural. Right now, natural means nothing. If you read natural on your food package, it means nothing, because there's no regulation attached to how that word is used. But they want to make sure that it's okay and that it's regulated to say that GMO is natural. The GMA wants to sue states with election advertising disclosure laws. Well, why would that be? Because they were fined in Washington for money laundering this last fall in Washington. They laundered $11 million in Washington's I-522 initiative. So this is more than just Monsanto. And Severy, you said earlier, you said, I'm not even sure what Monsanto is, but Monsanto is a chemical company. It's been around more than 100 years, and 15 or 20 years ago, they branched into biotechnology or genetically modified organisms, and that's where they take a gene from a bacteria, usually, and they inject that into our food. It becomes part of the DNA of that food, and then they can douse it with a pesticide or with an herbicide, Roundup herbicide, which is glyphosate and a bunch of other stuff that makes the glyphosate even more toxic. And then the farmers can spray their farms with glyphosate or with Roundup, and it kills everything except for that food that is now Roundup ready. So you can have corn that grows in the presence of this toxic herbicide. You can have soybean and other crops that it grows. And although it doesn't grow well because it still uptakes the glyphosate, which is then in the food, which we then eat, which causes, we now know more and more problems are associated with our consumption of glyphosate. It was only this past week that doctors Anthony Samsel and Stephanie Seneff came out with a new article linking glyphosate to the rise in celiac disease, gluten intolerance, and irritable bowel syndrome. Prior to 1996, gluten intolerance was like statistically wasn't even around. When you were a kid, did you ever hear of people that had gluten intolerance? And nowadays we hear about it constantly. Yeah, everybody's got gluten intolerance. And now we're asking the question, well, is it the gluten or is it the glyphosate?
I think this gives doctors more business. Conspiracy.
It's good that we now have this research that's coming out that suggests maybe it's not the gluten in the wheat, maybe it's the glyphosate. And Samsel and Seneff have done the research and done the correlation and said, look, this is what happens to the animals when they're exposed to glyphosate, and look at the link in the rise of disorders that have come on since 1996, since glyphosate was introduced into the food supply. So if you're looking for that research, look those names up, look up those illnesses, and you'll see that it's come out. This is brand new stuff, just came out this past week. I love running across the country and talking about this because the presentation I give today is going to be different than a presentation I give next week, because new stuff is coming out all the time. It's the same old big money. It's the same old corruption and collusion with the government, but there's new research all the time that shows that this is really an important issue. This isn't a bunch of cranks on the sidelines that are just upset. This is serious stuff that is having serious consequences. Whether we look at the social costs, whether we look at the way it's destroying agriculture in third world countries, or whether we look at the way it might be impacting our health, these are big issues. I'm kind of just being a talking head up here, and I'm doing all the talking. I would love to pause and say, do you have any questions? Do you have any comments? Is there any direction you'd like to go with this morning?
Where is our country headed?
That's a great question.
We're all falling down, getting sick. The government doesn't really care. Everybody's trying to fight it, but all the politics is getting in the way of our health.
Yeah, well, my research would suggest, and I think Carol might confirm this, that we've kind of been taken over by some big corporations. And the corporations seem to be in charge, and the corporations are the ones that supply all the billions of dollars necessary to get key people elected into key government positions. We know that we have this revolving door going on in Washington, D.C., and many of the top people that used to work for Monsanto now work in the government, in regulatory agencies or other positions, and they go back and forth, sometimes numerous times. I don't know if you're familiar with the Seralini study. If you do anything on the internet, you've seen the pictures of the rats with the bulging tumors all over? Look up Seralini and just type GMO Seralini and read about that. In 2012, they published their research on lifetime. It was a lifetime feeding study of rats. And they weren't expecting this, but they found out that these rats developed all sorts of huge tumors, and they had all sorts of other problems, digestive problems, reproductive problems, the same sort of problems that farmers are seeing when they feed their animals GMO feed. But they found this, and they published it. And of course, when you publish something like this, it has to be peer-reviewed. It has to be subject to all sorts of review before a reputable journal would publish that. And then recently, it was only 2 or 3 months ago, Elsevier, the journal that published this research, retracted Seralini's study, meaning, oh, we're not going to go with this. We don't back this up anymore. And they said that they did it because the results were inconclusive. Well, we all know in science that rarely is anything conclusive. Scientists don't talk that way. They don't say, we know 100%. They always say, this suggests that we need more research. This suggests that we should do more of this and that. But they retracted the study because the results were inconclusive. Well, what might be conclusive in this is that Richard Goodman was hired on the editorial board of Elsevier shortly before the research was retracted. Richard Goodman was a Monsanto scientist for 7 years. And he's also associated with, let me see if I can find this and state this correctly. I'm reading an article from Dr. Mercola's website. Curious synchronicity of Richard E. Goodman being given a position on Elsevier's editorial staff shortly prior to the groundless retraction of Seralini's study. Goodman was a Monsanto scientist for 7 years and is an affiliate of the GMO industry-funded group, the International Life Sciences Institute. While Goodman has refuted any involvement in the publisher's decision to retract this most damaging of all GMO studies, the coincidence seems more than a little convenient. And regardless of Goodman's influence, the retraction is quite simply unethical and undermines the entire scientific process of discovery. And we've seen this numerous times with scientists who come out and publish something that goes against what the biotech industry wants to be promoted. We've seen scientists who have been dragged through the mud, had their character assassinated, and all sorts of problems. There was a recent article in The New Yorker talking about a man named Tyrone Hayes who did research on atrazine, which is Syngenta's, one of their #1 poisons, I believe. And he documented all the problems associated with atrazine, and they did a big smear job on him as well. We've seen that with numerous other scientists as well. So this is not a friendly environment for scientists to step into the fray and say, wait a minute, this isn't good. Their jobs are on the line. Their career is on the line. This is dangerous water to be in.
I have heard things like, you mentioned Steve Marsh, I think, in Australia.
Yes.
First thing I ever heard about was a man in Canada whose organic fields were contaminated.
Yes.
He was taken to court for protesting.
The campaign has gone wild on the internet. It's gone viral, and it's the I Am Steve Marsh campaign. It's hashtag I Am Steve Marsh. And that's gone out with a big Twitter storm because someone said, well, wait, what Steve Marsh is going through, we're all going through. He said, I am Steve Marsh. And from there, it is true. I am Steve Marsh. We actually took part in that campaign while we were outside of Palm Beach, California. And while we were running, we held up I Am Steve Marsh signs, which went across the internet as well. And Steve Marsh is an organic canola grower. His neighbor was growing GMO canola. And what we know about nature is that it's very good at reproducing. That's what nature is intended to do. And so organic certification says that in order to be organic, the standard is it is not GMO. And so when nature does what it does, and the GMO canola contaminates Steve Marsh's organic canola or any other farmer's organic or conventional crops, then he loses his certification. Organic certification comes with it the ability to get a higher price when you sell your product, because people want to eat organic. They don't want to eat GMO, because organic, for two reasons. One, the GMO process itself causes all sorts of negative side effects in the DNA. And so the GMO process itself is dangerous, but besides that, the organic means that it's free of the pesticides. And people that know anything about this don't want to be eating the pesticides. So he loses his certification, and he loses his ability to farm what he wanted to farm. Now, the question is, who should pay for that? Now, in a bizarre twist in America and in Canada, you mentioned Canada, when a farmer has been contaminated by the GMO crop, Monsanto has actually gone into those farmers that have been contaminated or victimized by Monsanto's technology, and Monsanto comes in and sues those farmers for patent infringement, because this conventional organic farmer is now growing Monsanto's protected, licensed seed. And they sue, and they have won numerous times, and that case was recently taken to the Supreme Court in the Oscata versus Monsanto case, and even the Supreme Court rejected their claims that they had any right to fear any sort of loss of profit due to potential contamination from Monsanto seeds. And of course, the Monsanto, what's the name of the Supreme Court justice who used to represent Monsanto? Clarence Thomas, thank you. Yes, he has ruled in favor of Monsanto, I believe 3 times now since he's been sitting on the Supreme Court. So it's no surprise that once again Monsanto wins, because it's not like we have Monsanto and the government. It's like we have they're together. And so there's farmers who are intimidated by Monsanto. They are victimized by Monsanto. Once they start buying the seeds, we talked to a farmer recently from Alberta. From Alberta recently, we were down the road a ways. Needles?
Yeah.
Needles, yes, we were back in Needles, and happened to run into a farmer there, and he talked about his experience, and he said he wanted to buy organic corn in Alberta, but he couldn't find any. The only option was GMO corn. And he said, we really don't want this, but this is the way it is. And then once you get into it, once you plant that corn, you can't go back and just claim that you're organic after that, because when you plant the corn, you also apply the input. You also apply the Roundup and the other inputs. And so your ground is no longer organic. And it takes some time before you could reclaim that organic standard. And so you get locked in the chemical treadmill. You have to keep going back to the same system. You can't save the seed and replant it the next year, because that's against the license, and you get sued for that, which many farmers have. And then as the crops, the Roundup becomes less and less effective, because nature does what nature does, and that is it adapts. And those crops that are most able to withstand the application of Roundup survive. And so we get super weeds. Those bugs that are most able to withstand the presence of Roundup or BT GMO crops, they adapt, they survive, and so we get super bugs. And so it's a failed technology. Everything they do produces more problems than it solves. And the weird thing about this, the amazing thing about this, if I had a technology and I sold it to you and it failed, you wouldn't buy my stuff anymore, right? Well, Monsanto turns around and says, well, this isn't really a failure at all, because we've got something better for you now. We've got something even stronger. And now we've got Dow Chemical, which is about to come out with Agent Orange corn. Do you remember, of course you remember Agent Orange from Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Half of the chemical makeup of Agent Orange is 2,4-D. Right now, the USDA, just I believe yesterday, announced that they've extended the open comment period on Agent Orange corn and soybean, so that the public can make comments about those crops. And if the USDA gets its way, and if Dow gets its way, then we will now have Agent Orange corn being fed to us in the United States.
Why would they buy it when it says Agent Orange?
The reason they're going with Agent Orange is because Roundup is becoming less and less effective. Farmers are finding that it's no longer killing the weeds like it used to 15 or 20 years ago, because the weeds are adapting. So now they're coming out with stronger chemicals. And so Monsanto's solution to every chemical failure is a stronger, more toxic chemical. And we on the you know, as the consumers of all of this, we end up buying this and feeding this to ourselves and to our children.
Well, the cancer fight is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more money.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because isn't the government already paying our veterans who've been exposed to Agent Orange for their cancers like
Yes.
lymphoma, transitional cell bladder cancer, etc.?
Yes, and that was hard to
Five different-
come by, and it's a pittance for what they should be being
It's a
paid. Yes.
pittance, but then to come back and create Agent Orange here. Because
Right.
I looked up because I thought, well, if our veterans in their limited exposure to Agent Orange have all these problems many years later, how about those that live in Vietnam?
Right.
You do not want to see those websites.
You do not want to see the pictures.
They are horrific.
Right.
And now we're going to create that in our own country.
Yeah, you would think, you know, if you created a chemical that created these poor Agent Orange babies, I hate to use that phrase, these are human beings that are forever impacted, and now second, third, fourth, fifth generations continue to be impacted genetically with horrible malformations. You would think that you would walk away from that and bury that chemical forever. But if you're a chemical company and you made your biggest profit from Agent Orange, and that's what Monsanto did, that's where they really grew rich, then you know, why leave a good thing?
Could you talk about the 64 countries that have won or are being successful in battling the GMO adoption of products and seeds
Well,
in their areas?
Yeah, well, those 64 countries, they're not under the total control of the US/biotechnology industry. They have people there who say, wait, if we're going to have this stuff, let's label it. So these are 64 countries that have labeling. There's a handful of countries that have also banned GMOs outright. Okay.
Is France one of them?
France is not one that is banned outright. It was part of the European Union. The European Union really strongly rejected GMOs back in the 90s. And that was when Dr. Arpad Pusztai came out with his GMO potato study, and he got on TV and said, I wouldn't eat this stuff, not after what he had seen. And when you hear Jeffrey Smith tell the story, Jeffrey Smith is director for the Institute for Responsible Technology, that's another website that you really need to look up and study. There's encyclopedic amounts of information there at the Institute for Responsible Technology. But Jeffrey Smith tells the story that Arpad Pusztai was a hero for about 2 days. A couple of calls were allegedly placed, and Arpad Pusztai was fired because he had come out and said the wrong thing about the wrong industry. But there was a gag order placed against him, and sometime after the gag order was lifted, he then went public and told his story. Well, the UK media went wild with it, and the public responded by saying, we don't want this. And it was only in a period of 1 or 2 weeks that the manufacturers of the food over there said, fine, if you guys don't want to eat this, we'll just source with non-GMO sources. And so it wasn't really that the governments over there came out and said, wait, we're opposed to GMOs. It's that the people said, no, thank you. We're not going to buy it. We're not going to eat it. And really, it does seem that if we're going to be effective in the United States, it will come down to the people saying, no, thank you. We're not going to buy it. We're not going to eat it. Because we see again and again and again that our government is not supporting our interests. The government is not listening to the people. 93% of the people in the United States have said, we want GMOs labeled. And with those sorts of statistics, why is it that we can't get one state to pass GMO labeling? Although one recently did, is it Vermont, New Hampshire?
It's Vermont and Connecticut, but it doesn't go into effect until other states have passed it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
It's on the books, but not law.
Yeah. So the deal with California, remember, I have to say, I'll back up and say this. The thing I've learned by running across California and now into Arizona, the thing I've learned that's perhaps most troubling about the GMO issue is when I pass out the GMO seed packet and I say, we're talking about genetically modified organisms, and I get this blank stare. And I realize that here I'm preaching to the GMO-free choir. You're here because you've heard about this and you're concerned about this. But most people, the vast majority of the people out there, do not know what GMO stands for. They don't know about genetically modified organisms. And even in California, where Prop 37 was a big thing, it lost. And it didn't lose because people opposed labeling. The media would report it that way. But it lost in California because Monsanto and the GMA pumped in $45 million and convinced people that if they got their packages labeled, it would cost them $400 a year. So people not knowing what GMOs are, but knowing what $400 is, and knowing how hard that's to come by, they said, why would I vote for a label when I don't even know what it is? I don't know why I would want this. And so that's why the labeling initiative, or the proposition, lost in California. That's why the initiative lost in Washington. If it came straight down to a vote, do you want GMOs labeled? Yeah, it would win hands down. What I did find in California was that anybody who knew anything about GMOs was opposed to GMOs. But most people just didn't know. Most people just didn't know.
Letters to them.
Pardon me?
It's just 3 letters to
Yeah,
them.
yeah, they just don't have the information. So, partly what we're doing in crossing the country is to just talk about GMO. Yes, genetically modified organism. Yes, there is a concern here. And yes, it goes far beyond the health benefits of the food itself. It's about our political system, and it's about the destruction that it's causing in so many ways.
I'm just thinking, if we can't pass anything for labeling, and there's more and more GMO on the market, and then it crowds out everything else. If the things that are not GMO are more expensive, people won't have any choice. They can't afford the IFA, and they'll get the GMO instead.
Yeah, well, many people do buy the quote, cheaper foods today. When you buy cheap food in the grocery store, it costs less in the grocery store, but that's because the way the food bill works in the United States, where everything that favors the cheap foods are so heavily subsidized. When you buy your cheap hamburger in the grocery store, it's not cheap. If you paid for it what it actually cost to produce, you'd be paying, I've heard, as much as $30 for a hamburger because of the environmental costs that are involved. Because when they feed that grain to the cows, that grain has been heavily subsidized. Okay, and then the farmer that raises the cows, he is heavily subsidized as well. So all this stuff that comes and looks cheap on the outset is not cheap at all. Then when we eat this, quote, cheap food, and we suffer from all of the debilitating illnesses that now plague us in the United States, we have health care that goes through the roof. So again, cheap food is not cheap. Yeah. So, hats off to Arizona. I just want to, Arizona, Maryland, Hawaii, these are states that are working actively on labeling GMOs. I read recently from a friend in Utah that Utah is getting ready to have a labeling initiative. They're working on that as well. There's something like 25 or 26 different states across the U.S. that are working on getting labeling, GMO labeling. And for the GMA, their solution to that is go to the federal level, and let's get the federal level to come in and say, let's make it so states can't do this. Let's make it so individual states don't have the right to label. And at the federal level, let's say, no, it can't be done, and we're not going to let you do it. If you followed this at all, you may have heard of the TPP recently, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's a big trade agreement with, I believe, 12 different Pacific Rim countries. And part of the TPP is to have text in there that actually says that the labeling of GMOs would not be allowed in those member nations. And so they're working every angle they can to make sure that we don't get GMO labeling. Well, why is it so important why do they work so hard to make sure that we don't get labeling? Because they know from what happened in Europe that when labeling happens, people don't buy it. It's as simple as that. They don't want the labeling. One Monsanto representative said a decade ago, it's a skull and crossbones. And it truly is, and it should be. And we shouldn't be apologize for that. Yes, it is a skull and crossbones on your industry, but that's not our fault. That's your fault for creating the industry. I want to read this a little bit. Senator Ed Abelsir, am I saying that name correctly? Out of Arizona, has introduced a GMA drafted bill for the voluntary labeling of non-genetically engineered food in defiance of the Non-GMO Project, the preeminent third-party verification program for non-genetically engineered food. The GMA's bill would allow food from animals that have been fed genetically engineered food or injected with drugs produced with genetically engineering to be labeled as non-genetically engineered. What happened to Senator Abelsir? Last year, he sponsored SB 1180, a good bill for mandatory labels on genetically engineered food. Arizona's need-to-know activists aren't hanging around the Capitol trying to figure that out. They've launched an initiative drive to label all foods sold in the state which contain genetically modified food or ingredients, let me say quote, genetically modified food or ingredients consisting of or made from genetically modified foods, unquote. The measure, if approved by voters, would include labels on meat and meat products from animals given genetically engineered food or hormones. Backers have until July 3rd to get 172,809 valid signatures to put the issue on the November ballot. Get to know with Right to Know Arizona. Does that all sound right to you, Carol? Mm-hmm. That came out from, that's an article by Alexis Baden-Meyer with Organic Consumers Association. It came out February 20th, two days ago.
And that's how new this initiative is, yeah.
Beautiful. Again, that's why I love doing the work that we're doing, because it is new. It's happening right now. We've go ahead.
I'm just thinking of it. All the schools around you, that the kids should be aware of this and their parents.
Everyone should be aware of this. Yes, thank you.
To speak to the kids about this stuff.
Yeah. And that, yes, and I agree with that 100%. The trouble is when you start talking to the kids in a public school system, there are some concerns that people would say, well, why are you giving the floor to these people that are wearing these psychedelic T-shirts and not giving the floor to the other side, to the big money? Yeah. So
when you and David run back into town, do you know your route?
David, will you come up here for a second?
Yeah.
I think the mic might pick you up a little better over here. This is my son, David. He's 15 years old, and he is on track to be becoming the youngest living person to run across the United States. Who was the youngest?
Tobias Cotton.
Tobias Cotton was 15 years old when he did it in 1928. And he did it as part of the Great American Foot Race. And he was doing it to raise money to help his family, because his father had an accident in his auto mechanic shop and was injured, so he wanted to get that $25,000 pot. So he was doing it for a good cause, and we're doing it for a good cause as well. It's not to raise money to put into our pockets, but to raise awareness about what's going on with the world's food supply. So your question was, do we know how we're coming back into Flagstaff? Our route is chosen day by day. We literally get together the night before and say, well, okay, we've got this map that says we should go this way. We've got Google Maps that says we should go this way. And it's almost like flip a coin and try it out. And even when we get on the road, it's like, I can't make sense of this. I don't know if Google's right. I don't know if I should trust this. So we're starting in Belmont, going down a 2-mile road that ends in a dead end that takes us to the old Route 66 trail that takes us down paralleling I-40. And we're going to be checking the maps. We're going to be checking the Google Maps. And hopefully we'll end up in Flagstaff before nightfall.
Follow the railroad track. You'll be fine.
Yes. Yeah.
They follow the river, but railroad track. Amen.
So We've been speaking a good bit of time. It's probably a good time to wrap it up. I don't know whether there's things I should say before we wrap it up, but we really appreciate your presence. We feel privileged and honored to be able to do what we're doing, to literally run across the country. Google claims by the time we've run into Flagstaff, we will have run 487 miles since we started. We're actually keeping track with our Garmin watch, but I haven't totaled up the figure yet. But we're on track to running 3,000 miles, getting us back to Atlantic City mid-July. And hopefully we'll be in the Missouri area, the Kansas City, Missouri area, for the March Against Monsanto on May 24th. I've been asked to speak there at the March Against Monsanto. They're near the Monsanto headquarters, so that will be quite an opportunity to do that.
So it's just the men that are running?
Yes, and Chris, do you want to come up on this side of the camera? Chris is standing on that side of the camera, but my wife, Chris. And
support.
And in the back is Olivia. You can see she's way into this. Chris and Olivia are the support team. And I don't know, well, I know personally where I would rather be. All we have to do is step outside the door and run, but they have to do everything else. And that's a lot of everything else. We're talking about moving the truck and moving the trailer every 2 or 3 days. You know, all that's involved in doing that, making sure everything is working, doing the logistics, doing some PR work, as well as taking care of what's going on back home, because we still have lives back home that we're trying to coordinate, and the logistics and, you know, all the stuff that goes on. Just because we're on the road, those things are still happening back in Sitka, Alaska. So, yeah, it's they're very, very busy, and we're very grateful for all the work that they do to make it possible for us to just go outside and enjoy the running.
If it wasn't for the political stuff, you wouldn't have to be doing this.
He'd still want to run. He'd still want to run.
Yeah, that's true. David wants to run whether we're doing this or not. But yeah, that's true. If people got what they wanted, we would all be eating clean and healthy food, and we wouldn't have to be battling with chemical companies.
Some democracy.
Good.
Okay, is there any other questions, or should we wrap it up here?
Great. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for being here.
Are you guys huggers?
David loves hugs, and I will